the Freedom House recently came out with their annual report on global democracy, and it doesn't look good. For the 15th year straight, they find that democracy globally is in decline. And at the same time, maybe not coincidentally, President Biden and his administration have made it very clear, stated on numerous occasions, that shoring up democracy at home and abroad is a key priority of this administration. So today, that's what I want to talk about. The Biden administration and their democracy agenda. To do that, I have brought in one of our resident democracy experts, Jonathan Katz, my colleague at the German Marshall Fund. He is the executive director of the Transatlantic Democracy Working Group. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for joining me.
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you. And also director of democracy initiatives at GMF Washington.
Yes. So lots of democracy in what Jonathan is doing. And I'm Rachel Tausendfreund. I'm the editorial director of the German Marshall Fund and part of our monitor team. So we're going to get right to it with a big name. Samantha Power was named to be the head of USAID, the American International Development Organization. She's pretty well known globally, right? But as a kind of human rights advocate, she was on Obama's National Security Council and later became his ambassador to the UN. So it seems like this is a signal that USAID is going to be important by picking such a high profile person. But I'd be also interested to know from you, Jonathan, do you think she might have a slightly different approach at USAID than others have had, given her particular focus in the past? And what do you think it's going to mean for USAID and democracy?
Yeah, I think she's obviously Samantha Power has been an author, human rights advocate, has served in senior positions previously in the Obama administration, including as the U.S. ambassador to the UN from 2013 to 2017. And so that means that at that time there, she handled everything from national security issues to human rights issues, including issues related to Syria, related to other challenges globally that the Obama administration was dealing with. And she was also in the National Security Council in the Obama administration, working on humanitarian issues and democracy-related issues. So she's bringing this tremendous experience, multiple decades of working in this space. And I think really President Biden, when nominating her, said she's the right person, the right type of moral compass to help lead efforts at USAID to be in the top position, to advance a democracy agenda, but also to address the other challenges that you do at the head of USAID, which is, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's global health, which is a big issue right now. The U.S. has reemerged, is re-engaged again at the WHO, World Health Organization, but also providing funding for COVID funding. So I think she's well placed to help lead this effort. For the first time, this position is going to be elevated to a seat at the National Security Council. And that's really important because that's where these decisions will be made in the White House with key partners from Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, to Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and also the Vice President and the President. And so I think this is that signal early on, and the President stamp on this particular nomination and how he described Power and how she described her own role in sort of her welcome video when she was nominated really highlights that this has been that development has been placed equal with diplomacy as a key part of U.S. national foreign policy strategy.
So you actually gave me the perfect segue there, because you mentioned it's now an NSC position, which hadn't been the case. So USAID is obviously an important player in kind of the administration and the organizations that we have working on democracy globally, as well as humanitarian aid. But in terms of what we're doing to support global democracy, the National Security Council and the White House are probably the other two big players. So aside from Blinken and Biden, are there other people that we should, be aware of who are going to be playing important roles and might have their own spin on things?
Yeah, it's a good question. First, we're in day 51 of the administration. And so there's a number of people who've been nominated for key positions, including Samantha Power, that haven't been confirmed yet. And so the administration still has a number of key roles to fill at both these higher levels and then sort of these assistant secretary levels, those that will be carrying out this democracy strategy. But already, you're starting to see, some of the names filling in, for example, at the NSC, including Jonathan Katz, who's going to be at the NSC and is going to be directing the democracy and human rights portfolio there. Of course, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. You look at what he has said about this issue of democracy and its interconnection with U.S. foreign policy and domestic policy, and you get a sense that this is being driven directly from the White House, including from a president who has tremendous experience both in the Senate as vice president and president, and Vice President Harris as well. She's already taken on a lead role speaking to a number of key allies, U.S. allies. And what you're seeing in all of the communication, including in Biden's Munich Security Forum speech, the one that he gave recently at the State Department, President Biden, you see it in Tony Blinken's speeches as well, including just 2 days ago at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where this word democracy and democracy promotion and support is littered in a way, or included in a way, across these speeches and statements in ways that I have not seen in any previous administration. So words on a paper are important. The actions will matter most, but that's what this administration I hear is talking about, including sort of an upcoming democracy summit that is going to bring together U.S. partners. The outline of that isn't completely there yet, but we know that the priorities are going to be countering authoritarians, addressing corruption, and then also human rights and humanitarian issues. But human rights will be that focal point. So you get three pillars that we think that we know will be the outline and the contours. But the other part, which you mentioned earlier too, is this is about domestic issues as well. And this administration is very keen with the understanding of what happened over the last 4 years under President Trump and how that's impacted the U.S. image and ability to promote democracy, that we have to take care of things at home and then also lead by example. And I think this is a very important sort of way that they're looking at this, is that we're not going to be coming to allies and partners and saying, you need to do the X, Y, and Z. We're going to prove that we're doing it, and we want you to be there with us. So I think this is going to be really kind of a shift in how the U.S. is engaging on this issue. Of course, it can always rub up against national security issues, but I think that getting things right at home, addressing COVID-19, getting the economy going, addressing racial injustice, ensuring that our elections are fair and free and transparent in the United States are all going to be part of this. And of course, January 6th and the aftermath has really impacted the view of this administration, and also the urgency, the fierce urgency of now, I'm using a phrase from the previous administration, to get things done now and not wait.
Yeah, I can only agree with what you said in terms of talking about democracy and talking about sort of the strength of our democracy in our foreign policy. I've never seen this language as prominent and as sort of consistent throughout any administration or a new administration. So this is obviously different. Rhetorically, the difference is very clear from the Biden administration to the previous administration, the Trump administration. That had a completely different way of talking about these things and looking at these things. Also, as you say, the Democracy Summit Initiative is a multilateral initiative, which is something the Trump administration was less of a fan of. They preferred a bilateral approach. So here we're seeing two key differences. What else do you think will be kind of crucially different? Have we seen early signs that are more than just words, but actions that are showing that that is not going to be just rhetoric, but it is going to be a very different approach to democracy?
Well, one, I would really sort of draw everybody's attention to this interim national security strategic guidance that came out last week. Secretary Blinken walked in a speech, sort of the global audience and the U.S. audience through what is in that guidance. And I didn't get a chance to go through it and circle the word democracy in it, but it probably is it's the one word that dominates the whole strategy. And I think that's really particularly important. And I think you're asking sort of the good question. Early on, the administration has clearly started to put in place, one, they're still bringing people in to fill these positions. It's the most diverse group of national security officials in the history of the United States. So that's something about walking the walk and talking the talk, which is saying that we're going to project what America is today externally. We're going to ensure that it's inclusive. We're going to be addressing the issues that the United States and the American public care about. And so already you're seeing through this interim national security, this interim guidance, what that is going to look like. You're seeing it being echoed by key officials, including Blinken, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, but on down as well. And when you see General Austin, Lloyd Austin speaking about ensuring that that the military addresses the issue of extremism within its ranks, that is very important. And these messages are happening quite early. But there's a couple of things that have already happened that I wanted to just point out. One, on human rights, because we want to sort of talk about these pillars. The U.S. has said that it's seeking to rejoin the Human Rights Council at the UN. There's a new multilateral approach, which means going back into these bodies, working with partners, but also because there's a concern about these bodies and and the influence of authoritarian powers in these bodies, including China. I was at the State Department working on multilateral issues in the bureau that oversaw the Human Rights Council work of the U.S. How important it is for the U.S. to be back in those bodies and not just sitting on the sideline, but actually participating and leading. We can talk about a presidential proclamation on LGBTQI people globally that the administration has already put out to protect that community globally, sending a signal immediately that this is important. We talk about the sanctions that were placed on Navalny and the Navalny poisoning, but also his arrest. Russia and China and combating autocracies, is part of that pillar of effort on democracy, how to address them, along with human rights and corruption. So the message is being sent already that we are going to take on actors that commit human rights violations. We're going to fully deploy the global Magnitsky as well. We're going to go after corrupt actors like Kolomoisky, who is an oligarch in Ukraine, who has been part of a group of oligarchs and power structure that's held Ukraine back from democratic progress and Euro-Atlantic integration. And just yesterday, there was a statement on Hong Kong as well regarding current situation and a new law that was passed that would affect elections in Hong Kong, not making them fair and free. So from Hong Kong to Burma, where you see sanctions being placed and even statements on a regular basis, you're seeing this entire democracy strategy play out, and it's got multiple actors across the U.S. government, including the Treasury Department, which has been part of. You look at sanctions on Burma and Burmese officials or their family; those are responsible for oppression of protesters, the ones that were involved in the military coup. You see the Treasury Department being involved in that, State Department, Commerce Department. And when we talk about democracy, it's also these multiple departments and agencies that play different roles. Yes, State Department and USAID play the lead along with the NSC, but you also have multiple from Department of Justice, Department of Labor, and so on, that are all playing a role, including in trade deals as well. So what you'll...
Yeah, this is what I actually want to get to a bit, because you mentioned in your answer, you were at the State Department. I know you were also at USAID, and we think of sanctions, we think of official statements as kind of tools. But what are some of the other things, the other tools, the other mechanisms that maybe at USAID or elsewhere that the U.S. has to try to support global democracy?
Yeah, and I think sanctions are one tool. It's not the only tool, and and it's useful in some instances. Sometimes it could be overused in a way that isn't as effective as you want. I think that's a debate that's happening here, and talking to the people at the US Treasury who actually handle this even early on in this administration, and hearing from them directly about, about what they're doing, also about the challenges that a lot of these departments and agencies face, which is a reduced workforce because people left government during the Trump administration, including those civil servants, foreign service, officers and others that felt that they couldn't work within that last government. So they're dealing with those issues. But the key pillar, the key tools in the toolbox have been, one is diplomacy. And obviously you're seeing that right now with Blinken, Secretary Blinken and others speaking directly to the issue of democracy, but also President Biden sort of looking at Secretary Blinken in a speech and saying, you guys are empowered to do this. And that means that the tip of the spear is not only just about Washington, it's about our diplomats in the field across the world that are going to be asked to actually carry out this agenda. The same thing with USAID. Both the State Department and USAID carry out development assistance in the democracy space. You have, according to the Congressional Research Service, it's about $2 billion a year that goes to democracy promotion globally. Frankly, I think it's not enough, but it's something that we're likely to see an increase in, because I think when we look at something like the Democracy Summit, one of the outcomes is likely to be to ask other countries, like we do with military support through NATO, 2%. If we, God help us if we have a conversation about our relationship with Europe, that we don't talk about 2%. But what about development support? What about increasing the level of funding to support democracy, to combat corruption, to address autocracies, to defend human rights globally? When you look at the numbers globally, you see that the largest development providers are the United States, and then our partners in Europe, including the EU. So that's going to be really important. So when we bring it back to Samantha Power, USAID typically carries out large percent, it differs per year, but it could be 80 to 90% of democracy funding for assistance is usually carried out by USAID. My expectation is that you're likely to see an expansion of funding, but also geography in terms of where the US might engage and invest in democracy promotion, and then also addressing issues like corruption. But when you address issues like corruption, you're gonna need not only the development side and component to it, and you also need your Department of Justice, the Treasury Department, and closing loopholes. And it comes back to this issue of proving that we will do things at home as an example, and then ask others to do the same as well. This means closing loopholes for shell companies, for those that are actually moving money through the US and European financial systems that benefit oligarchs or autocrats. So the expectation is, you're going to see beefing up of the departments and agencies that are actually enforcing these laws, and then going after and finding that money, freezing it, and going after others and applying sanctions. So this is a whole government approach. It includes the military, which is also part of a number of bodies too, where democracy is a top level issue. That includes NATO. And you can't have NATO allies inside of NATO that are autocracies, that are democratic backsliders, and think that it won't affect the overall policy making or the concerns about China and Russia, which are the two real challenges in terms of country specific, not thematic, because there's still counterterrorism issues that really pop up in what the administration is focused on right now, including these upcoming trips by Secretary Blinken and the Secretary of Defense to meet with their partners in South Korea and Japan, and also a first meeting with high-level Chinese officials in Alaska that's going to be coming up in the next several days.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you pointed to some really big issues that we're definitely not going to get to here, where, when it comes to the troubling problem or conundrum of partners who maybe themselves have some democracy issues, and what to do when you have a very important security partnership that has democratic issues. But that will be for another segment, because we try to keep these short and focused. So I think we gave everyone a lot to look into in terms of the people, the different actors involved, and also some key initiatives that we can hope we might see passed within the first year or so of the administration. The loopholes, going after loopholes that are really helping autocratic actors do nefarious deeds across the world. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. Jonathan Katz, thank you very much for coming to talk to me about democracy and